Hello and welcome virtually to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My name is Christopher Sands and I'm director of the Canada Institute here at the Wilson Center. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all here and to start our program off. Today, we're going to be talking about some important research that has been conducted with the support of the Fulbright Canada program. Our moderator today and our principal investigator, whose research we'll be discussing, is Mr. Virgil Parker. Virgil Parker is a program officer for equity at the Rochester Area Community Foundation. Since December 2021, Virgil has been a Fulbright Research Scholar at the Cross-Border Institute at the University of Windsor in Ontario, Canada. Virgil graduated from Howard University in 2021 with a degree in journalism. He's originally from Rochester, New York, and he was president of the Lambda Pi Eta Society, National Honor Society at Howard. Virgil's had several interesting internship positions at Goldman Sachs, the US Chamber of Commerce, and the Office of Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer. He's received several awards, such as the Next Generation Scholar Award at the Department of Strategic Alliances and Outreach in the US Chamber of Commerce, and the William Randolph Hearst Fellowship at the Aspen Institute. Virgil's a mentor for the Collegiate 100 of Howard University and has just recently been recognized as a White House Historically Black Colleges and Universities, HBCU Scholar. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Virgil. Thank you very much for bringing your research here, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm really happy to have this opportunity. I'm a proud, as you mentioned, I am a proud alum of the Fulbright program, and I was really enthusiastic given my relationship with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and my experiences there, having learning about the importance of a diversity and inclusion in U.S.-Canada trade and global trade in general, to emphasize this research and pursue a way to amplify trade relations between both countries. Before I get into the rest of my remarks, I wanted to take a moment and to listen to some very important speakers. The U.S. Ambassador David Cohen, Canadian Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, and also a senior official from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Neil Harrington, as they talk about the importance of this topic and why it should be supported to have diversity and inclusion in U.S.-Canada trade relations. Please let's take a moment to listen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm Kirsten Hillman, Canada's ambassador to the United States. Thank you for joining this important discussion on how Canada and the United States are working together to foster diverse and inclusive trade. I would like to acknowledge the research of U.S. Fulbright student Virgil Parker and Dr. Bill Anderson of the Cross-Border Institute at the University of Windsor on this subject, as well, of course, as our host, the Canada Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center. As you know, the United States and Canada have one of the largest and strongest trading relationships in the world. But we're always trying to expand and improve this relationship. And Canada has set important goals in this regard. Specifically, we're working hard to increase diversity and inclusivity amongst business owners whose firms trade with the U.S. or have the potential to do so. Trade is good for businesses. Firms that trade tend to be more resilient, more competitive, and they create higher paying jobs. Businesses owned by women, Indigenous peoples, and other underrepresented groups are an integral part of North America's economic footprint. But we all know that these businesses don't always take advantage of the benefits of trade. Recognizing this, President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau have mandated our teams in both countries to ensure that underrepresented business owners have access to the necessary tools and support to thrive in a competitive, global environment. We're doing this important work with the United States bilaterally and also under the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, the CUSMA, where we've made key commitments on inclusive trade, trade in gender, Indigenous peoples, as well as having a dedicated chapter on small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs. The Canada CUSMA SME Committee has been very active. It's held various events to assist SMEs in leveraging the agreement's benefits. Canada, alongside the U.S., is advancing gender equality and women's empowerment at the World Trade Organization. And we look forward to continuing these efforts as members of the WTO Informal Working Group on Trade and Gender. and as supporters of the Joint Ministerial Declaration on Gender Equality and the Joint Statement Initiative on Services Domestic Regulation. Canada also continues to negotiate inclusive trade provisions wherever possible, and we were proud to advance the Global Trade and Gender Arrangement and the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangements to ensure that women and Indigenous peoples have access to international trade opportunities. Large businesses also have a role to play towards more diverse trade between Canada and the United States, and should look to draw on the innovation and capabilities of the thousands of SMEs participating in trade when building their supply chains. Integrated cross-border supply chains are key to a globally competitive North American economy. To remain strong and resilient, these supply chains must not be undermined by discrimination based on the gender or ethnicity of the business owners and their employees. So let's continue to be creative in our efforts towards a sustained, diverse, and inclusive trade relationship in order for our countries to grow and prosper together. Nous devons continuer cet important travail. Canada will be doing its part. Again, thank you to the Canada Institute, Virgil Parker, and Dr. Anderson for facilitating this opportunity. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Thank you to the Woodrow Wilson Center for hosting this event on U.S.-Canada trade relations in partnership with the University of Windsor's Cross-Border Institute and our distinguished Fulbright student, Virgil Parker, whose research has provided the impetus and content for our discussion. As the United States Ambassador to Canada, I am leading my country's efforts to advance the 6 strategic bilateral priorities, or pillars, laid out by Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden in February 2021 in the roadmap for a renewed U.S.-Canada partnership. One of those pillars commits our countries to building back better. When we say building back better, we acknowledge that our goal cannot simply be economic recovery. We must also recognize that the economic impacts of the pandemic and inflation have been particularly devastating for small and medium-sized enterprises, especially those owned by women, people of color, Indigenous peoples, and other underrepresented groups. So we must act together to ensure that the benefits and opportunities from building back extend to all populations and groups, that our recovery efforts are equitable and broad-based, and that we generate economic prosperity for everyone. Promoting, supporting, and building linkages between the U.S. and Canadian diverse small and medium-sized enterprises has been a key focus of my work since arriving in Ottawa in December of 2021. For example, I recently hosted a trade delegation of more than 20 small and medium-sized enterprises from Philadelphia, my hometown, to explore opportunities for building linkages with Canadian SME counterparts. Similar to Virgil's research, the United States has also supported a program with the NGO Startup Canada, which conducted focus groups of diverse, women-owned U.S. and Canadian SMEs in an effort to identify barriers to and opportunities for expanding their businesses across the border. Startup Canada is now sharing those lessons learned on social media through profiles of the participants. I know from personal experience that it is in the economic interest of both of our countries to recognize and address the barriers that inhibit diverse SME growth, to amplify the examples of their success, and to make sure that they have opportunities to succeed and prosper. Before I became an ambassador, as a corporate executive, I helped create programs that ensured businesses owned by women and people of color were represented in our supply chain and had equal footing to compete for contracts and to provide services. Those programs resulted in a greater competition, a richer market of services and service provider, and ultimately better quality products and services for all. The same is true for the U.S.-Canada trade relationship. By ensuring diverse SMEs have access to information, opportunity, and capital that support their success and connectivity, we are strengthening our mutual economic prosperity. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing the results of today's discussions and event.
Hello, I'm Neil Harrington, Senior Vice President for the Americas at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and it's my privilege to welcome you to this very important event. I want to commend Chris Sands and the Wilson Center's Canada Institute, longtime great partners of the Chamber, for championing inclusion and diversity in the U.S.-Canada bilateral economic relationship. I also want to thank Dr. Bill Anderson at the Cross-Border Institute at the University of Windsor and his talented Fulbright Scholar Virgil Parker for their research and leadership in this critical and timely topic. I don't think I need to remind any of you that Canada and the US are each other's top trading partners, to the tune of more than $1 trillion Canadian in annual bilateral goods and services exchanged. As impressive as that is, I know a lot of us believe that it has far greater potential if we ensure that small businesses on both sides of the border, especially women and minority-owned small businesses, are provided a level playing field to compete. The two-year-old USMCA, for which many of us advocated extensively, successfully sought to modernize the North American trade relationship by going beyond NAFTA to enshrine best-in-class provisions in areas like e-commerce, financial services, customs, and agricultural trade. But I'd submit that the agreement's most important accomplishment was introducing the first small and medium-sized businesses chapter in the U.S. trade agreement. Introducing an SME chapter was a particular priority of the Canadian government, which clearly understood that micro, small, and medium-sized businesses create the vast majority of jobs in all three of our North American economies. Furthermore, women and minority-owned businesses represent the fastest growing subset of SMEs. So ensuring that we're all working towards enhanced diversity and inclusion in the continental trade relationship is not only the right and principled thing to do. Indeed, it's a true economic imperative if we're to achieve the goal we all have of making North America the most competitive economic region in the world. With this in mind, I salute all of you for participating today and for doing your part to ensure opportunity for all who seek to contribute to our shared prosperity. Have a terrific discussion, and I'm already looking forward to engaging on the important work that comes out of your meeting. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that was very fruitful. I want to again give a very well extended thank you to our two lovely ambassadors, as well as Neil Harrington from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for offering those very, very kind remarks. As they mentioned, we have a significant total with over $1 trillion Canadian in goods and services trade between U.S. and Canada. And that is significant to make sure that there is proper distribution and inclusivity for those women-owned and minority-owned SMEs and business owners who are part of those traditionally marginalized entrepreneurial groups. We want to invest in this idea and these policies and these focuses and these practices to ultimately grow our economies. Before we get to our panel discussion, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge another focal part of my Fulbright research, which is a survey. I've taken the time with the Cross-Border Institute in the University of Windsor to connect with business leaders in both the public and the private sector, but particularly U.S. business owners, to acknowledge any impediments, any barriers, any challenges that could incur or have incurred for business owners who are eligible to trade with Canada. I want to hear directly from you. I want to hear what the challenges are, what you've experienced, and get suggestions as to how you think that we can improve this. So we can gather this data, collect it, and be able to unite and share a balanced front on creating a purposeful and impactful policy for improving U.S.-Canada trade relations. I encourage you all to go to the webpage that's affiliated with this event at wilsoncenter.org, and you can go and look under the title of this event to realize the description of the survey and complete the survey. That will take less than 20 minutes. It will be very impactful for not only yourself, but individuals across our greater economy. And again, we hope to gather that data and collect it and use it as a resource and a tool for creating more purposeful geopolitical policy between US and Canada and ensure that our trade relationships are more inclusive. So without further ado, I want to lastly encourage everyone to please insert questions, comments, or concerns in the question box that's right before you. on the webpage or in the comment box. And later point when we have a public Q&A, I'll be sure to address you. And we're going to look forward to having a very fruitful discussion. I'd like to move forward with introducing our speakers today. First, we have Marty Liardi Anderson. Ms. Liardi Anderson has over 20 years experience providing strategic policy and operational advice to the most senior decision makers in public and private sector organizations. She has led several large-scale projects and innovative initiatives. And at the Cross Border Institute, which she's executive director, she works on research projects looking at the movement of goods, people, and services and funds across the international border. So we are very happy to have her expertise. And I'm also happy to share that Marta was a part in supervising and evaluating my research. So Marta, thank you for being with us today. Second, we have Ms. Lori Tanous. Lori Tanous is a business owner. She's a cross-border attorney and a highly requested speaker on many trade and industry forums globally. She provides a lot of expertise on public policy, counsel to the government, officials and industry leaders, and on matters relating to cross-border management, security, immigrations, customs, mobility, trades and services, and so much more. She also serves as a special advisor on customs, immigration, and border security at the Cross Border Institute. So she was also very instrumental in not helping my research, but the trade focuses and purposes of many businesses each year. So thank you, Lori, for being with us today. Very, very happy to have your expertise. And last and certainly not least, we have Ms. Diane Rico. Diane is the President and Chief Executive Officer and Chair of the Board of Directors of Rico International Group Incorporated. It is a diverse technology-driven manufacturing company located in Lakeshore, Ontario. The company was established as an exporter and continues to serve as a major U.S.-Canada markets, a major resource for U.S. and Canada markets to help ensure the sustainability of manufacturing and production in North America. And we're going to definitely be happy to talk to her about her relationship with women-owned and minority-owned SMEs and how she works to sustain the manufacturing industry across North America. So without further ado, I want to get to my first question, and I'm going to direct my first question to you, Marta. From your expertise and in your wide wealth of career and experience, what are the most significant aspects that you have learned from U.S.-Canada trade relations from your point of view, please?
Well, thank you, Virgil, and very excited to contribute to this discussion today. To your question, I don't think it's shocking when we talk about the complexity of the trade that goes on every hour of every day between Canada and US. And the complexity is rooted in the number of rules and regulations that exporters and importers face in doing their daily business. So I'd say, you know, what bubbles up to the top every time we look at whether it's an issue about moving people or goods, as you said as part of my bio, whether it's services or funds, it is a complex landscape. And the more we aim to educate folks about how to get through that complexity, I think the better we are at seeing some successes.
That is very helpful. To that point, Lori, I'm going to direct this next question to you. Marta just spoke about very briefly about how that experience with trade can impact women and people of different demographics. Can you explain to us your experience being a business owner as a woman of color and providing services to both sides of the border? What has your personal experience been like?
Certainly. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this distinguished panel today. It's a pleasure for me to be here. So thank you to everyone who made that happen. In terms of my experience, I would say that mine was a bit unique in the sense that for those that know me, you'll know I'm very outgoing. And so for me, being able to find the right organizations to work with on both sides of the border was a little easier for me. And what do I mean by that? I reached out to the Canadian consulate as soon as I became an attorney, so 19 years ago, reached out to the Canadian consulate in Detroit, and they were phenomenal and instrumental to me in helping me, find the right groups to work with. And so that was one of the first times that I was able to go into a foreign country, because at the time the US was foreign to me. I was a Canadian citizen. Now I live in both countries. But then through that outreach, I was able to meet a number of other instrumental people along the way in different Middle Eastern and Arab American and Arab Canadian business groups who also really, I'm Lebanese, of Lebanese descent. Both my parents were born in Lebanon, immigrated here to Canada. I speak Arabic. So for me, I'm very still connected to that community. And so it's sort of like a game of who you know. And so I kept getting connected to various people who were very helpful to me along the way. And so for me, it has been a journey. I won't say it was without challenge, and I think that's another question later. But from an experience, I would say overall, I feel very lucky and very blessed. And I think that because so many people have helped me along the way in the Middle Eastern community, in the Hispanic community, in the various groups, that I feel like I can now give that and pay that forward.
Absolutely. Diane, I'm going to build off of Lori's question and also add a little component to it to allow you to expand upon it. I want to definitely hear about your unique experiences, Diane, on being a woman business leader, but also specifically leading a major company like the firm that you do, and having a lot of potential for influence. So talk to us a little bit about your experiences and how you use your firm to engage with women-owned and minority-owned SMEs to allow that sustainability that you intend from your company to expand across demographics. Can you explain that to us in your words?
Yeah, certainly. Again, I'd like to reiterate what both Lori and Marta said. It's a pleasure to be here today. And it's always great to be in the company of other like-minded people who want to see success for minority and women-owned businesses. It's funny to hear talk to Lori speak. She's the extrovert, I'm the introvert on the other end of the scale. So when I hear her talk about the things that she did early in her career, I wish I could turn back the clock and have had the confidence to do that. That was probably my biggest barrier to success in a lot of areas of my leadership, and not just in the trade area, was that lack of confidence. But once I started to do things like Lori did, which was start to build my network and realize that, we all have a lot in common. There were a number of times where I was the only female in a group full of men. And instead of focusing on the fact that I'm a woman and they're all men, once I started to focus on the fact that we all have similar problems and we all are trying to solve those and run our businesses, that changed everything. So sometimes it's a little bit of perspective, I think. I have to, almost make a confession right now that I don't feel that we're doing as great a job as we could in helping to promote other women and minority businesses. And it's not for lack of desire to do that. I think we have a real visibility problem. I think it's great to hear about trade missions and ways for people to introduce groups of people. But the reality is, with our current purchasing environment and our supply chain challenges, trying to find a supplier who can give it to us on time at the right price is a huge challenge. And if I have to my team has to throw extra time in there to then try and find a diverse supplier, wow, I'm almost handcuffing them, but I want them to do that. So, one of my recommendations, and I may be jumping ahead here, but is to find a way where we can elevate that visibility. I mean, I don't know if it's a searchable database or some way of tagging our websites that were, minority or women owned, so that when you go searching for a certain commodity or service, that we rise to the top, right? Or that could be an additional search term. Right now it seems like, I'm always asking, I'm always looking, I'm searching for people for my board of directors, as a matter of fact, and trying to keep that to be diverse as well. And it's a struggle, I have to say. It's not as easy as like. So certainly when I do run into someone and say, okay, great, you do this, and you're a diverse supplier, fantastic. Here, let me hook you up with our purchasing people. We really like to talk to you. So it's not for lack of desire, but sometimes the effort is a little tough.
Diane, I think that's very valuable because you see instances like yourself where companies say that we want to have a diverse supplier, we want to have a diverse leader on the board, be it a woman, be it a minority, and they don't know how to tap into that pool. And to the point, which is one of the focuses as to why I pitched my research to Fulbright, is that do we have a collective database that's well known enough, that is widespread enough, that is encompassing enough to be able to cite and source these agencies, these organizations that can provide resources, trades, and goods to organizations on the other side of the border. Supply chain was a focus of my research. And I'm glad that you spoke to that. And I do want to follow with you in a few moments and talk about supply chain because that's important. Building on that, Marta, Diane just emphasized why it's important and what challenges that she has with identifying those minority-owned and women-owned organizations. From your perspective and your experience, talk to us why it's important to invest in those minority and women-owned led groups, not only grow the economy, but to also really focus on the individuals who want to be a part of this trade space and giving them a foundation to be successful. Why is that important, please?
And I want to get back to specifically something Diane raised about data and databases and how critical they are and the efforts that the WTO has taken in that regard. Look, Ambassador Hillman spoke to this, the importance, so did Ambassador Cohen, the importance of small and medium-sized enterprises to both our economies doesn't escape anybody who's been looking at where jobs are created across the board. Across the board, most new employment comes from small and medium-sized enterprises. Let's throw another statistic out there. The World Trade Organization recognizes that 60%, almost 60% of trade and services internationally involve women. So if we start to add up the data, we can see very quickly how important the small and medium-sized enterprises that, employ women and are led by women. And there's some data that indicates that women-led companies tend to hire more women. We want to recognize the economic imperative that brings for both our countries. So to say that, to ignore that would just be detrimental and frankly silly. I think there's good news, Virgil, that the WTO has had their eyes on the issue of gender and how important it is to bring women and other minorities to this world of international trade. Since the early 50s, when they did start to have declarations suggested into the regional trade agreements. Some of these discussions have been more fruitful than others, but we can see, here we are today where the CUSMA or in the US, the USMCA has specifically under its cooperation clause, under its labor clause, under its SME clause, a real focus on how do we engage women and minority groups into the discussion in a real and meaningful way. So let's get back to the database that Diane has referenced. The WTO has been working on this initiative since 2019. How do we put together a database where we can house all kinds of information that business leaders like Diane might find useful? I admittedly don't know how far along they are on the initiative, but it's a great initiative. Unfortunately, sometimes government and government bodies don't move as quickly as business do. But I think the initiative itself is key to bringing forward in critical decision points, so that if procurement policy under any trade agreement directs you to at least make a search, there's a place to go and do a comprehensive search of that information.
I appreciate you saying that, Marta. And there was a couple of points that you made that I just want to emphasize. The emphasis on data-driven decisions. This is going back to what you and Diane were just speaking about. Having enough data to understand the number of businesses that participate in the trade, not just the revenue, but the number of businesses who participate in U.S.-Canada trade, and to what effect do we understand which of these businesses are receiving what level of the revenue, and how to improve those outcomes is what we need to understand, even if it's managed by the government, is what we need to understand to improve these metrics. Because when we follow the theory of change model of setting an objective and working backwards, we want to understand how we get to an objective in X amount of years, but we need the accurate data to be able to understand on both sides of the border, to understand our challenges around diversity and how to make them more inclusive. Thank you for that. Lori, you, again, working closely with businesses on a consistent basis, understand some of the challenges, have observed some of the challenges. What are you hearing directly from the people? I can tell you with the focus of my research, I was trying to understand, do people understand regulatory compliance? Do people understand that they're even eligible to trade with Canada? Do they have issues with infrastructure or supply chain, as what Diane alluded to a few moments ago? Do they not know how to connect with businesses and people on the other side of the border? What challenges are you hearing directly from the business owners who want to engage but run into barriers?
How much time do we have? Because I have quite a list. No, sorry. In all seriousness, I think Diane hit the nail right on the head in terms of saying, businesses need to make decisions straight away. They don't always have the time or the luxury, especially with the supply chain fractures that we've seen over the years. Those fractures were always there. All COVID did was bring them to the surface for everybody to see them. I think if I was to be able to wave a magic wand, one of the things that I would do was to increase awareness of DBE and SBE certification. Meaning, for me, I'm an attorney. I know that I needed to register myself as a SBE years ago, right? But not a lot of minority business owners or women business owners know, number one, even how to do that, what the state requirements are, what the federal requirements are, either in Canada or the US. And so I think that we have a huge number of low-hanging fruit companies who we could turn to. So in Diane's instance, a potential company that she could utilize, right? But I don't think that many of them are taking advantage. And I think part of it is because there's just not a lot of awareness on how it is to do that, or guidance even for these small and medium-sized companies to be able to get themselves certified. And to be quite frank, sometimes, depending on where you're doing it, the steps to get that certification are quite complex. I understand why they have to be complex, but if you're not somebody who understands how all these regulatory hurdles work, that's a challenge. That's an impediment. So what does that mean? That means you have less number of potential suppliers in that pool for people like Diane and corporate executives who need to make instant decisions. So again, there's availability out there, but I don't think there's enough knowledge and awareness. So that's one. And I hear that from companies saying, I don't, exactly what Diane just said, I hear that all the time. The second certainly is the the regulatory compliance, right? In terms of, how do I get my people across the border? I don't understand these rules. Why is it so hard to navigate this? That was another, and we mentioned it, the other day, is that, so we had all this focus on the movement of trade and how important that is. What we didn't realize, and again, this was really brought to the surface from the companies that I assist on a daily basis, is during COVID, the people who help that supply chain along the way were restricted in entering the US and in entering Canada unless they were essential. And the definitions on who was essential were not the same in these two countries, and it varied across industries. And we had no consistent approach in how those determinations were being made. So I got the brunt of it, being an immigration attorney, hearing from companies saying, this is so frustrating. I can't do business across this border like this anymore. So I'll leave it at that because I could go on, but those are sort of the top two that are relevant, I think, for this panel today.
Well, your input is extremely valuable, and to those listening, please understand what Lori is, even though she said it kind of jokingly, is very serious, and I'm sure Marta and Diane would agree. The list is expansive, and you have institutions like the Canada Institute, you have several business associations, you have pools of academics and experts, think tanks who are looking on how to improve trade relations, understanding the conditions around trade relations, understanding patterns, and how do you improve those patterns to make them more inclusive. And sometimes it's offering that capital and technical resources to these businesses to help them get their goods and services across the border, to realize that there's an opportunity there. To that point, Diana, I want to speak more towards you as a business owner. Again, I love the expertise you bring to this panel as an individual who leads a very successful and influential company. The private sector has the ability with its resources, particularly certain companies, to step in and create improvements in areas where the government may fall short at times. So when you recognize that as a business owner you're looking for a minority supplier, and you realize that your team is taking the extra mile, sometimes expending significant resources to find that, how can you then respond down the line and try to create metrics on making that pool of diverse supplier easier? How can you do that from a perspective of a business owner, whether it's joining business associations, participating in trade shows, making yourself available to these organizations and seeking them out? Can you talk about what's within your pool of availability to really seek and invest in these business relationships, diverse business relationships?
Yeah, so we are one of the companies that went through the process of becoming women-owned business, WBE Canada certified a number of years ago. Can't remember now, it's been more than 10. And through that organization, I had been very hopeful, to be honest with you, that I would then be able to connect with a lot of other people in the manufacturing space, to be honest with you, because when it comes to a lot of services, a lot of them are sourced locally, and I don't believe we have all that many WBEs in the Windsor. I know we have them in Detroit, but again, that's another challenge of how do I connect with those people, because it's a different organization and different chapters, and there are some events that cross over. But in any case, so when I joined that, I was really excited because I thought, great, not only will I find some potential customers here, but I will also find some potential suppliers, and we are all kind of on the same page. Obviously, there's a desire there to work together. And I was quite disappointed, to be honest with you, with the quantity of WBEs who actually have really anything to do with manufacturing other than from the service and support area. A lot of human resource companies, a lot of other types of services, promotional products, things like that. But someone who was running a company that distributed chips, for example, for our automation division right now, which are hard to come by, things like that. I didn't find a lot of those people. And while I met some great people and I networked and I learned if I ever need translation services, this person's great and whatever, but I couldn't find that there. And so I've also, kind of getting back to the networking thing, I was part of a group in Ann Arbor, Women's Presidents Organization. And there I found a few more people with sort of tech businesses. And so we did do some work together. And one of those people from that group is actually on my board of directors now. So there has been some value to that. But my knowledge of any real businesses within call it the Detroit Metro Michigan area is mostly through her or through that group, which is kind of sad, and I've attempted to, and I've been to the accelerator there downtown and met people, but it's tough, and my time is limited too. So I think there's a lot we could do. Again, I think even we need help, right? Could we accelerate the process beyond what the pace government could do it at? Yes, I agree with that. But I think we still need some additional tools and some additional assistance in creating those connections. And whether that's through a database or something else, I'm not sure.
Certainly. Marta, to build on that, first of all, thank you, Diane. That was very helpful. Marta, to build on that, I'm going to ask you a similar question, Diane, because I'm leveraging your expertise from both the public and the private sector, which is important because you've seen both work independently and in tandem, particularly through public-private partnerships. That's what I want to focus in on. How, even with public-private partnerships, can the private sector step in and be that resource to businesses on the other side of the border when they want to acquire? How would you work and advise the companies that are led like similar to Diane's, the larger institutions who can work with those diverse businesses on the other side of the border and be that tool to help bring out that supply chain? What advice would you have for them, and how can the public sector support the private sector's efforts in that area?
Virgil, the public sector governments at various levels have been trying, and again, I think there's quite a bit of success in the renegotiation of the NAFTA agreement.
Mhm.
From a policy perspective, the tone is correct. So I think there's a lot of smart and genuine effort that has established the right tone. Again, whether it's under the labor chapter or whether it's under the SME chapter, we want more diverse groups of folks involved in trade between our two countries. Where I think the private sector has the strength, as Diane said, is to understand more clearly what it is that she needs as a business leader, what other business leaders need. That's not government's job. Government's job is to set the right policy tone. Okay, so we give them a check mark. Next, we say, what is it as a government that we can do to facilitate the work that somebody like a Diane Rico needs to do, or a Lori Tanous needs to do? And in some instances, it's linked to domestic policy. So I throw this out there because it's always a hot topic. Affordable daycare for the caregivers of children. I just saw a recent study that said most daycares need to be more flexible in their hours to reflect what it is that the schedule of most women entrepreneurs. It's not a 9-to-5 schedule, and I'm quite sure Lori and Diane would say that as entrepreneurs. So should a daycare system reflect that reality? Again, where is the connection between the government policy and the reality that people are living? I think that needs to be bridged. There are some successes. There are successes when you talk about encouraging and empowering organizations like WeTech over at the University of Windsor and the City of Windsor. Small microloans that allow women entrepreneurs in the tech space to talk to other women entrepreneurs in the same space. Again, is it through a meet and greet at a breakfast event? Is it a lunch event? Is it a web discussion like we're having today? I think those are the things that we need to really get to. And having that conversation, and this is something that we do at the Cross Border Institute, is facilitate those conversations between the private sector and government. Understanding how the rubber hits the road is important, and understanding that sometimes, and I say this with all due respect, and Chris has heard me say this before, government needs to get out of the way and let business lead and let business set the next phase of what needs to be done.
This is very helpful, and I appreciate this, Marta. First of all, I want to just mention to the audience, those who are listening, please start to put in your questions or your comments in a couple of minutes. We'll go to the public Q&A right before we close. In Chris's closing remarks, I'm sure he's going to put input onto this conversation, because we have, again, institutes like the Canada Institute that focuses on improving trade, which I'm very happy about. But please insert your questions, and I can get to the public Q&A in just a moment. But Marta, that was very helpful. And to build off of Marta's comment, Lori, positioning over to you, companies have, larger companies for that matter, have some of the resources to be able to go out and look for the smaller SMEs, the women-owned and minority-owned SMEs, or the support networks, which you mentioned earlier, you were able to be a part of. I'm going to ask you a two-pronged question. One, how do you think these larger companies should look for those support network of minority-owned and women-owned business leaders who can bring their assets across the border as far as the trade opportunities? How should they look for them? How can they invest in them? As in, again, how would you advise someone like a Diane Rico and where to look for these networks? And then finally, what progress would you like to see on this issue generally within the next 3 to 5 years, as we hope to continue to grow this trade relationship, given the fact that U.S.-Canada trade relationship has been a leading one for many years? How would you address those two factors, please?
Virgil, that's a fully loaded question. So let's see. First of all, I would say that one thing that's helped me out as a woman minority-owned business is that over the years, I've had companies who had said, if you're not certified here in this state, but we want to do business with you, and we are willing to wait until you get your certification, right? So identifying the talent that is out there. Let's say you meet somebody and they don't have that certification, walking them through, or being a sponsor or a supporter to them, to getting them to that place where they are certified, so then it counts, right? In terms of, because most large companies have a percentage every year, especially in the manufacturing space. They have to meet a certain, percentage requirement of how many minorities that they are utilizing in their supply chain. So I think that's one. Diane spoke to some of the challenges with some groups, and Diane, because I have openly said how much of an extrovert I am, trust me, I've had a lot of trial and error. I've been part of a lot of groups. I was like, oh, okay, that one didn't work out. Okay, let's try this, right? But one of the things that I have found that really helps me, and I have two sons who have really helped me with this along the way, but social media, LinkedIn, and being able to find connections through LinkedIn. So a lot of my larger companies will connect to me that way, and I will connect with them, and then be able to make introductions. So I think that's another resource. The U.S. Commercial Services part of export.gov has a wonderful, wonderful minority outreach program. And so I would also encourage, the way I have reached out to the Canadian consulate. And so for those companies that are looking to do business in the U.S., reach out to the Canadian embassy or consulate in your city, and then vice versa. The American companies that want to do business in Canada, reach out to your export services, because they have lists. It's not a comprehensive one, the way Marta, which I think is a great suggestion, and Diane, great suggestion, to have this, one place, one stop to be able to find those. But those are two resources I use often, and I recommend that to my clients, those larger clients, in order to use those services. And then in terms of, what do I think, could be done next? If we look at the largest number of employees that are coming up the ranks, they happen to come from minority populations. So I think if we look and say, wait a minute, there are more women in the workforce, more minorities in the workforce, outpacing the counterparts of the non-minorities, that says to me that we really need to be doing more in a proactive manner to encourage these minority companies, women-owned companies, to be more front and center, right? And so what I try to encourage, and through my work at the Cross Border Institute, Dr. Bill Anderson, Marta Anderson, over the years have assisted me in being able to do my work on anti-human trafficking, anti-forced labor. What that has done in being able to implement that type of policy within companies has really helped me on this side, meaning being able to work with large companies saying, what does your policy look like on forced labor? It makes them look at other policies that they have that are similar. Well, how do we keep Indigenous women, minorities, those individuals who are more susceptible to being trafficked? You know what? We need a more supportive ecosystem. And that's one of my, additional suggestions to that. But again, I could go on and on, so I'm just going to stop. I'm going to shut it.
This is very helpful. And one, I'm going to give a quick reminder again. If there's any questions from the audience, please insert them, and then my team will let me know if there's any available. But Lori, that was extremely helpful. I'll ask a final question to Diane and Marta, and I'll pass it back to Chris if we don't have any questions from the audience. But Diane, a final question to you, which those will be two-pronged. From the questions that I've asked you in the comments that were made by Marta and Lori today, and yourself, some of what we're discussing today from the position of what you can do as the leader of a significant business in ensuring that there's diversity and inclusivity and equity in your procurement network of services and goods. It's really important. Some of it would describe it as social responsibility, cross-border social responsibility to an extent. To that point, how would you describe the importance of cross-border social responsibility, and why do you think companies like yours should participate in it? And then, of course, lastly, what progress would you like to see made on this issue of diversity and inclusivity and sustainability in these type of trade relations over the next few years, please?
Oh, thanks, Virgil. First, I want to say, Lori, thank you for your work in the area of human trafficking. Something that I also have really a passion for, if you will, in terms of seeing that we get that cleaned up. And it kind of leads me a little bit into the question that Virgil asked, which is, how important is our social responsibility? Wow, like, is there anything else? I mean, we don't exist just to make money, and the word I want to use, I probably shouldn't use in a webcast. Anyway, and say, don't worry about the environment, don't worry about people, don't worry about, doing the right thing. I mean, that's not what I would say 99% of businesses are about. And if they do become about that, something's gone wrong somewhere along the way. So I think at our heart and core, we want to do the right things. We want to have a clean environment. We want to have representation. And so it's interesting, we've always been a company. If you look at my workforce, you'll see it's quite diverse. You look at our board of directors, you'll see that as well. And so we've done a lot of sort of what you would call the right things with respect to ESG and social responsibility over the years, but we've never really documented it, and we've never really measured it. And we're finally embarking upon that journey literally within the past couple months. This is a very timely question, with some software that's going to help us sort of track where are we at, and then where do we want to go, and show our progress as we go along the way. And one of the things that I think is so important about that is that because we'll be tracking it, it will, sort of like anything you measure, it gets better and you focus on it. But also it will, I'm hoping and I'm expecting that it will lead us to more suppliers who are closer to us, that have the same kind of priorities. If I'm buying stuff from across the ocean, I don't really know what's going on there. I can have somebody maybe give me a certificate that they're not using child labor or other doing other bad things with the environment, but it's tough for me to see that, especially a company of our size. So if they're in Michigan or Ohio or somewhere in the continental North America, I get a chance to actually go there and inspect and validate that what they're telling me is real. So, we're all sharing the same air and planet and communities, really. And I think we could really help each other to strengthen that. So I think that should be a great focus. And maybe that's a good way to pull us all together too, to help us overcome some of these barriers that we've had.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that, Diane. I have two questions here from the audience, which thank you, audience, for agreeing to participate. One of them is about litigation, which I'll direct to you, Lori, in just a moment. Before that, Marta, I wanted to direct this next question at you. Diane spoke to it at the beginning of the event and also a few moments ago, when it comes to resources that are used to look for those diverse suppliers. Somebody wants to know specifically, how can businesses looking to choose diverse suppliers balance it with profitability? We understand that the bottom line effect is numbers, and what does the relationship with looking for diverse suppliers and getting them in their procurement network, how does that affect the books at the bottom line? From your experience working with business leaders, do you understand how they can go about this metrics or go about this method with profitability in mind?
Well, Virgil, I would actually defer to Diane on that question. But I think from a research perspective, it's interesting to see that there are a number of this is another challenge. We talked about challenges throughout this discussion, but one of the challenges that there are a number of organizations out there with all kinds of different information. Sometimes the challenge is just sifting through it. And how do you find the time, getting back to some of, when the rubber hits the road, how do you find the time? And I think Diane mentioned this earlier on, to sift through the information. And specifically to your question, gosh, all of the challenges that a business owner faces, and then you're trying to find that maybe needle in the haystack of a supplier in your supply chain that could balance not only the demands of a procurement policy, but also, satisfy your profit margins. But Diane, I'll hand it over to you if that's okay.
Yeah, please, Diane. Definitely, you can speak to how's this relationship, that effort that you take as a leading company, is if it can get unprofitable, and is it worth the investment, as you were speaking to earlier, please.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that there are a lot of opportunities for us to benefit from that. But I think it's almost when you think about sort of when you're raising your children, you know, if you can teach them to tie their shoes on their own, that's one less thing you have to do, right? So working with suppliers too, and we've had customers through the years who have kind of coached us along, not necessarily with respect to diversity, but in providing them with exactly what they want. But they had to give us a chance at first because we didn't start out sort of at that top level. And so again, it kind of gets back, you know, I hate to sound like a broken record, but can I even use that term anymore? I'm dating myself. But anyway, you know, it gets back to this, how do we find each other? You know, like it's great if I say I've got the willingness to invest some time in somebody who's maybe a little smaller organization than I might normally be dealing with. But if they show me potential and they show me that they have the desire to become a great supplier to us, we can help with that. But I have to know where they are and I have to know how to find them. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Diane, both Ian as well as you, Marta. That was very, very informative. So Lori, I'm gonna direct this question to you. It is specific about litigation, and you hear this concern from time to time. So I'm definitely looking forward to your input about this. But the question read, you know, one concern that individual said, one concern I have is that inclusive market regulations are vulnerable to allegations of trade discrimination, just like we've seen with disputes over environmental standards. How do we write inclusivity into trade deals without generating more litigation? Do you have advice to companies who, particularly the larger ones like Diane's, who are worried about the litigation that can ensue when it comes to trying to incorporate more diversity in their trade opportunities?
Sure. And I think Diane, once again, hit the nail on the head. And this is the first time I've met you, Diane. So it's such a privilege to meet you. I know Marta speaks so highly of you, so it's great to make that connection. But she said that they're starting to track and measure their efforts in this space. So whenever I have to advise a company on how do you mitigate your risk of litigation, how do you mitigate your liability, I say keep track, keep records. Let's be able to say that you didn't just hire Lori Tanous because she was a woman and she was an SBE, but rather you vetted her. You went through and you said, yes, she is a former customs and immigration officer. Yes, she's been an attorney for this many years. Yes, she's vice president of government relations at Canada's largest customs broker. Yes, she meets all of these requirements, right? And so what I suggest that people do is whatever the services that they're looking to hire somebody for, or supplier or anything like that, to be able to have, and even if it's in an Excel spreadsheet, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. I'm not suggesting that people go out and spend money on software they may not need, but to be able to track what your requirements are. What is your business requirement? What is it that you need? What's the problem you need to solve for, as Marta always said, right? So if it's A, B, and C, why does this company fit this requirement, so that somebody doesn't come and say, well, you hired them because of this. You can be able to support your decision. And I think that's really important. And if companies can do that within their organizations, have those discussions around their boardroom tables, it'll help prevent litigation. Sometimes is unavoidable, but it definitely will help mitigate the instances of it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Marta, I will direct the last question to you. And of course, Lori and Diane, if you want to chime in on the last question as well, it's important. But the people who are listening today, who you heard us use the term sustainability, they want a direct definition about it. You know, people can describe sustainability in a myriad of ways, including systems level change that is long lasting, change that is significantly impactful. But to read the question directly, it says, I am wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you define sustainability in terms of trade and how trade can lead to greater sustainability. Do you want to talk about that, Marta, from the perspective of the academic community, and also, again, with your expertise with working with the public and the private sector? And then, of course, anyone else can chime in on this. But I think understanding that term around sustainability would be very important, so people can realize how we don't have to come back to this conversation often and just have equitable and inclusive trade relationships that are at the systems level.
What a very interesting question. You know, when we look at the history of the discussion about gender and trade agreements, as I said at the outset, it's been a topic of discussion for a very long time. There have been various efforts to develop the policy language that gets to the action that's necessary to affect change. The sustainability part, I think, from the Cross-Border Institute's perspective, is applicable to not only the economic impacts of a policy plus an action, that a number of people are benefiting, that we're creating, as the Canadian government is rightfully focused on, very good paying jobs that give people a level, a standard of living that we are proud of in Canada. It is the opportunity, as you're saying, Virgil, not to revisit the same conversation over and over again. So how do we avoid Groundhog Day? And that, I think, is, there's a number of activities that go with that. Diane talks about her company measuring their activities, measuring the impact of their activities. And as Lori said, there's that other part of it that talks about the policies that you have as a company within your own four walls, as a company that's interested in advancing this very real issue that we have in front of us, that then will theoretically help you grow your business. So I think it's on various levels, Virgil. I think the danger of any kind of policy discussion is that we restrict the definition so tightly that we don't allow for an evolution of the discussion. No, I'm not saying go back to Groundhog Day. I am saying that as we've, have seen through the trade agreements, that the discussion on gender has evolved as society has evolved. And sometimes we have to push the issues and we have to push the progress. I think we have to be very careful when we're developing policy that we don't limit the discussion, that we keep it broad enough, and that we welcome the next generation's discussion about what it is that we've seen is very important, like the discussion we're having today.
Absolutely. Lori, before we close, Lori, Diane, anyone want to add about that in the conversation of sustainability? The comments have been so very insightful and fruitful thus far, but I do thank you. And if not, that is totally okay. I would just want to say thank you again to this panel, to the speakers, to the questions, to the Wilson Center, to the Cross-Border Institute, to the U.S. Embassy, to the Canadian Embassy, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and all the partners today who went into putting this discussion together. This is going to be a conversation that's going to attach to several other conversations around this topic for years. This is not the first. I'm confident this won't be the last for some time. We do have a lot of progress to make on this issue. Again, even if there's something as a simple recommendation, which again, that Diane mentioned, which again, I built my research on, is realizing that there isn't a well-known, fully, a holistically encompassing database to record the type of businesses, number of businesses that trade across the U.S.-Canada border, at least to my knowledge, and understanding the revenue that is connected to these particular type of businesses, so that we can begin from a data-driven perspective to hash out on a policy level how we improve our economic conditions and really get to the bottom line of improving and amplifying inclusive trade outcomes between U.S. and Canada. We continue to be one of the largest, if not the largest, trade relationship in the world, and we can have a lot of incredible impact if we realize the power and the gravity of inclusivity. I'll close by saying I'll never forget having the conversation with a business leader in an association in Detroit who mentioned to me that she has member organizations who would rather go to Grand Rapids and do trade versus crossing the border right at Windsor, which is far more closer, simply because they don't understand that their service and their product is eligible to trade with Canada. They don't understand the tape, the bureaucracy. They may not have the infrastructure. They may not have the supply chain relationship with the Diane Ricos and the Rico Internationals, but we can step together both jointly and independently from the public sector and the private sector and within the civil society to make change here and have the affinity networks and the support groups and support the institutes like the Canada Institute at the Wilson Center to really improve these trade outcomes. So I thank you all for tuning in. I do want to encourage all the U.S. business owners who are women, minorities, or those who identify as a member of a traditionally marginalized group to please complete the survey that I've constructed with the Cross Border Institute. It is on the event webpage. If you go right there at thewilsoncenter.org and take a few minutes to tell us know about the barriers and the challenges that you've either gone through or what you anticipate, so that we can be able to record that data and work collectively to build a meaningful solution. So thank you all for tuning in, and I hope to make some very incredible and impactful progress on this. Chris, I'll direct it back to you.
Well, thanks very much, Virgil. And I want to say thank you to you. This is an important bit of research. One of the challenges that both Canada and the United States face is that trade policy is federal, but business is local. It's everywhere. And the federal government is strongest when it's dealing with international affairs, but often challenged when it's trying to understand what's happening at the level of ordinary people, at the level of ordinary businesses. So I salute the governments of Canada, the US, and Mexico for putting the importance of inclusive trade at the center of their renegotiation of the NAFTA to create the USMCA. That's important, but it's going to take all of us, and especially people like you, Virgil, who brought this kind of research to the fore, to help us understand how to achieve the goal that the federal governments have agreed on. And I'm reminded that a famous line from Martin Luther King, who said that power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve a purpose. And it's the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. That, to me, encapsulates the dilemma that we have. We have the power of the federal government, but we have the people on the ground who want to bring about a change in the participation of our trade to make it not only more inclusive, but to make economic prosperity more inclusive, to bring small and medium-sized enterprises to the table and help them, to use your phrase, Virgil, to amplify their participation and their voices and create a more meaningful social economy. This was a very, very good conversation. I want to thank Lori Tanous, Diane Rico, Marta Liardi Anderson for their participation. I want to thank the ambassadors and, of course, Neil Harrington as well. And last of all, again, Virgil, you've been amazing. Thank you very, very much. We hope you come back. And I hope you don't mind my saying that you're still a young researcher. So we are hoping for great things for you in the future. So keep on doing what you do so well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.